It is far more isolating to feel completely alone while sitting right next to your spouse than it is to actually live alone in an empty apartment. There is a specific kind of quiet that settles over a house when the frantic rush of daily family life begins to slow down. For many people in their late 40s, 50s, and early 60s, this quiet isn't peaceful. It's heavy. You might find yourself sitting on the couch on a Sunday evening, looking across the room at your partner of 20 or 30 years, and realizing that while you know their schedule, their coffee order, and their medical history, you have no idea who they actually are anymore. And worse, you suspect they don't really know you either. You are, for all practical purposes, married, but completely alone. This is the silent crisis unfolding inside many midlife marriages today. We are seeing a significant cultural shift where couples who have survived decades of career building, financial stress, and child rearing are choosing to part ways just as they reach the supposed finish line. What demographic experts call gray divorce is rising, particularly among those over 50, even as divorce rates among younger generations are actually declining. But the statistics only tell us what is happening. They don't tell us why. To understand the root of this disconnect, we have to look beyond the surface level of irreconcilable differences. We have to examine the unique psychological blueprint of a generation raised to be virtually indestructible, and how our greatest childhood strength, our absolute self-reliance, has silently become our greatest vulnerability in our adult relationships. To understand why your marriage might be struggling today, we have to go back to the empty houses of your youth. Most of us who grew up in the 70s, 80s, and early 90s were raised on a strict diet of early independence. We were the Latchkey Kids. We came home to empty houses, let ourselves in with a key hung around our necks on a shoestring, made our own after-school snacks, and figured out our homework without any adult intervention. If we scraped our knees, we washed them ourselves. If we got into a fight with a friend, we sorted it out. We learned very early that if something was broken, we had to fix it. More importantly, we learned that relying too heavily on others was a risk, and that showing vulnerability was a weakness. We developed a highly effective outer shell of hyper-independence. It was a brilliant survival strategy for a childhood where adults were often busy, absent, or overwhelmed. When we entered adulthood, built careers, and began forming long-term relationships, we carried this survival strategy with us. It made us highly functional, incredibly capable partners. On paper, Latchkey Kids make excellent spouses. We don't need hand-holding, we are practical, reliable, and we get things done. Because of this, many of our marriages began to operate like highly efficient corporations. We divided and conquered. One person handled the investments and the bills, while the other managed the school schedules and doctor appointments. We tag-teamed the grocery shopping, the home maintenance, the driving duties, and eventually, the care of aging parents. We were brilliant project managers, running a high-stakes household with military precision. But there is a profound, dangerous difference between running a successful household together and maintaining an emotional connection. For years, the sheer logistics of life acted as a protective buffer. When you are busy driving teenagers to soccer practice, climbing the corporate ladder, paying down a mortgage, and worrying about your parents' failing health, you don't have the time or the emotional bandwidth to notice the gap growing between you and your partner. The shared goals of survival and progress keep you aligned. You are teammates, facing outward, fighting the same daily battles. You assume that once the chaos dies down, you'll find each other again. The crisis begins when those external demands start to fall away. The kids grow up and move out, leaving behind empty bedrooms and a sudden, startling lack of noise. Careers begin to plateau, mature, or wind down, removing the daily distraction of professional ambition. The aging parents eventually pass away, ending years of heavy caretaking duties. Suddenly, the outward-facing teammates are forced to turn around and look directly at each other. Without the kids, the packed schedules, and the constant logistical fires to put out, the silence in the room becomes deafening. Many couples look across the kitchen island and realize they have spent 25 years playing parallel roles rather than sharing a life. They are roommates who share a mortgage, a history, and a set of tax forms, but very little genuine intimacy. This is where the survival skills of the Latchkey Kid backfire spectacularly. Because we were conditioned as children to believe that we are ultimately on our own, our default reaction to relationship stress is not to lean in, but to pull back. We don't know how to ask our partners for what we actually need emotionally. We don't say, "I feel lonely," or "I miss you," or "I need you to really hear me." To a former latchkey kid, expressing emotional need feels dangerously close to weakness. It feels like losing control. So, instead of communicating, we do what we have always done. We self-soothe and solve the problem internally. We withdraw. We throw ourselves into solo hobbies, intense fitness routines, travel, or work. We build separate, highly functional lives within the very same house. We protect ourselves from the pain of emotional rejection by convincing ourselves that we don't need the connection in the first place. When both partners are operating from this blueprint, they create a tragic feedback loop of mutual abandonment. Each person assumes the other is fine, or simply doesn't care, and so they withdraw even further. By the time the empty nest arrives, the emotional distance between them is so vast that bridging it feels like trying to cross an ocean in a rowboat. For previous generations, the answer to this midlife distance was often to just endure it. There was a strong cultural expectation that once you reached a certain age, you simply accepted a lukewarm, companionable marriage as the price of stability. You stayed together for the sake of appearances, convenience, or financial security. But our generation is different. We have always valued authenticity, even if we had to stumble through the dark to find it. We are also the first generation to reach midlife with the expectation that 50 is not the beginning of the end, but rather the start of a whole new chapter. With modern medicine and shifting social norms, a 55-year-old today can reasonably look forward to another 30 or 40 years of active, healthy, independent life. When you view the future through that lens, the prospect of spending those next 3 or 4 decades in an emotionally vacant, silent partnership becomes intolerable. The risk of leaving starts to seem much smaller than the risk of staying and slowly fading away. This is why we are seeing so many couples in this age bracket make the incredibly difficult decision to walk away. It is rarely because of a dramatic betrayal, a sudden blowout, or a financial scandal. More often, it is a slow, quiet accumulation of emotional neglect, culminating in the realization that they want more out of their remaining years than mere coexistence. However, admitting this to yourself is incredibly painful. The psychological toll of realizing your marriage has hollowed out is immense. It brings up a deep, heavy sense of guilt and failure. As people who pride themselves on their resilience and their ability to tough out any difficult situation, admitting that we cannot fix our marriage, or that we no longer have the energy to try, feels like a betrayal of our own identity. We are survivors. We don't quit. But we have to ask ourselves, is staying in a relationship where you are completely invisible truly a victory? If you want to save a midlife marriage from this quiet drift, the path forward requires a radical, uncomfortable shift. You have to challenge the very survival skills that got you here. The fierce self-reliance that served you so well in your youth, the armor that protected you when you came home to an empty house, is the exact thing you have to unlearn if you want to save your relationship today. It requires you to step out of the project manager role and step into a space of raw vulnerability. It means having the difficult, awkward, and terrifying conversations that you avoided for decades because you were too busy or too scared of what you might find. It means sitting down with your partner and asking, "Who are you now, and who am I to you?" It means being willing to admit that the old way of relating to each other, the divide and conquer strategy, no longer works, and that a completely new foundation needs to be built from scratch. This isn't about trying to recreate the butterflies and romance of your 20s. It is about building a mature, honest partnership based on who you both have actually become after decades of life experience, grief, career shifts, and personal growth. For some couples, this process of reintroduction can lead to a beautiful, incredibly deep second act. They discover that beneath the layers of domestic routine and parenting logistics, there is still a deep mutual respect and a genuine desire to truly see and be seen. They learn to transition from partners in logistics to partners in discovery. But for others, the honest exploration reveals that the gap is simply too wide, or that the desire to rebuild is only one-sided. You cannot co-create a connection with someone who is content to remain behind their own wall of isolation. In those cases, letting go is not a failure of your resilience. Sometimes, a gray divorce is the most authentic choice available, a difficult, painful acknowledgement that both people deserve the chance to live the rest of their lives fully, even if it means doing so apart. Ultimately, the silent crisis in our marriages is a call to pay attention. It is a reminder that relationships do not run on autopilot, no matter how smoothly the household is operating. The stability, the home, and the security we worked so hard to build are only the framework. It is up to us to decide what we actually want to put inside it. Whether you find yourself trying to rebuild the bridge to your partner today or navigating the painful process of starting over on your own, the challenge of this life stage is exactly the same. It is the challenge of finding the courage to be vulnerable, to admit our loneliness, and to decide that our emotional well-being is worth fighting for. If you are navigating this transition in your own life, or if you've watched close friends go through it, how have you managed the shift from the busy parenting years to this quieter, more reflective chapter? What did you discover about your relationship, or about yourself, when the noise finally stopped? Please share your thoughts and reflections in the comments below. Let's start an honest conversation about this.